Hi, I'm Richard Murphy, and this is the 22nd in the video series on the importance of tax transparency that I am hosting, and which is being made jointly by the University of Sheffield, where I work as Professor of Accounting Practice, the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, and the International Budget Partnership. In this video, we're looking at some of the practicalities of tax system management and of tax collection not already addressed in this series. We will then move on to how to account for those sums that are collected and the issues arising from them in the remaining videos in this series. We have in this series discussed many of the issues arising from the operation of the shadow economy, tax evasion, and tax avoidance. These are issues of concern for all tax authorities, but even if they could be managed, there are still issues of tax management to address in any tax administration if it is to successfully collect the tax owing to it. All of these need to be transparent if the tax authority is to enjoy the best possible chance of recovering as much as possible of the tax due to it. These issues do in particular relate to deciding whether tax should always be assessed by the tax authority or be subject to self-assessment via the tax return process, making the process of declaration as easy as possible, enforcing the timeliness of tax declarations, deciding on penalty regimes for non-compliance, providing appeal arrangements, resolving disputes, including providing legal access to tax tribunals and other court mechanisms if necessary, and the publication of findings from such disputes so that lessons might be learned. That having been said, there are some key aspects of tax transparency that have to be taken into consideration when looking at these issues, which are key to the operation of any tax system. In particular, if the tax authority decides that it will assess estimated tax liabilities as the start point in collecting tax owing by people, then it is vital that the authority publicize to the greatest possible degree what actions people must take if they do receive an estimated tax assessment that suggests that they owe tax, and what they can do if they disagree with the liability that is requested. Alternatively, if a taxpayer self-assessment basis for tax declaration and collection is adopted, then the tax authority has to expend considerable effort in making people aware of when they need to declare their income or other aspects of their financial affairs for taxation purposes if the highest possible rate of tax compliance is to be encouraged. This will require carefully managed information campaigns, especially around key dates in the tax calendar, for example, when tax returns are due. Whichever of these options is chosen, the process of tax declaration should be made as easy as possible. How this could be managed will vary according to local circumstances. Online declaration will be favoured by many tax authorities, but may not be possible if people do not have access to appropriate systems. In particular, it must be ensured that online compliance when using a smartphone is possible, because these are easily the most available form of online access in most countries. Whichever system of tax assessment and collection is chosen, the need for timeliness on the part of the taxpayer will have to be communicated very clearly as part of any tax transparency agenda. Almost every tax system works on the basis of the timely declaration of tax liabilities owed by the taxpayer, with penalties being imposed on those who do not meet the deadlines. What those penalties might be and how they will be collected has to be made clear by a tax transparency program if such charges are to be accepted as equitable by the people on whom they might be imposed. What is inevitable is that any tax system would also give rise to disputes. The reasons for these disputes might vary enormously, but all are eventually about the fact that a taxpayer thinks that they owe less tax than their tax authority is demanding from them. In that case, a tax transparency program has to make clear what those mechanisms are, how they can be accessed, what information is required by the appeals process, and what assistance might be available to assist those making appeals. This last point is important Some taxpayers might need legal assistance to make an appeal, and there may be occasions when a tax authority might think it appropriate to provide it. This will most especially be the case if there are matters of legal interpretation to be resolved. In that case, it might be in the public interest to seek a resolution that will assist future interpretation of tax law. Finally, when considering the subject of disputes, it is important that the decisions made by tax tribunals and courts should be made available as part of the tax transparency process so that those involved in subsequent disputes can see how the tax dispute resolution system works and understand what has been resolved. We have already highlighted the importance of tax law being readily and freely available within a jurisdiction. If information on the resolution of tax disputes informs the way in which tax is charged, thereafter, it is also important that information on such decisions also be made freely available to taxpayers who wish to know about it. Once these issues concerning routine management of the tax system are resolved and tax transparency policy around them is established, it is also appropriate to mention one further aspect of tax administration where tax transparency is fundamentally important. This is with regard to the payment of tax. After all, the end game for every tax authority when it comes to the tax system is that tax finally be settled by the taxpayer. As has already been mentioned, there are good reasons why some tax might be collected through the withholding of tax from payments made to individuals or companies. These arrangements can apply to payments of tax due on salaries and the withholding of tax due on such things as dividends and interest. However, it will remain the case that someone will be responsible for passing over the tax withheld to the tax authority, whilst there will also be many other forms of tax liability owing within the jurisdiction. This means that it is vital that a tax authority set out in the clearest possible way how tax must be paid and when its settlement is due. It should also make clear what happens if tax payment is not made on the date on which it is due. Quite what these arrangements are will vary widely from tax authority to tax authority. What is always true is that tax transparency about them is essential. In summary, whilst much of what we will discuss in the remaining videos in this series will be about the management of tax systems as a whole, it is always important to remember that a great deal of an effective tax transparency agenda focuses on the communication of critical information that the taxpayer requires if they are to comply with the requirements of the tax authority of the jurisdiction in which they live. On a day-to-day basis, the importance of the management of this communication process cannot be emphasized enough. If tax is to be collected from the right people in the right amount at the right time, with the least chance of dispute arising, the existence of effective tax transparency processes is key to the success of any tax system.